Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome back, Grid Mod Pod listeners. I may or may not be showing a lot of excitement right now, but this is a long time coming episode. Really something I think every utility is grappling with, really turning data into action. And it seems maybe from the outside looking in should be a lot easier than maybe Shane and I have come to believe. So I look forward to jumping into a conversation and sharing, really talking through your journey, where you are, Shane, what you're up to, and where we see it all going. So before we get started, why don't you take the opportunity to introduce yourself and what you're up to and the company you work for, and then we'll dive right in.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, let me start off by saying thanks for having me, Liz. Has been a long time coming, trying to get this scheduled. So thanks for having me. So Shane Powell, I work for Southern Company and specifically Alabama Power. I've been there 26 years. So I'm a software engineer and electrical engineer, and I disguised myself as an operations expert for like 20 years, right? And just had the opportunity through some good breaks to end up in the analytics space supporting power delivery. So my team is actually inside the power delivery organization for Alabama Power. And then just recently, we've been able to expand to doing data analytics for all of Southern Company, which includes Georgia and Mississippi Power.
And so for our listeners, one thing that's happening, and really, I think I lean into or talk a lot about on the Grid Mod Pod is, there's this language, there's these capabilities, these functionalities that we put words around. And so the whole podcast, Grid Mod Pod, is around the phenomenon grid modernization. It's a mouthful. And so at the crux of it, and what I show up all the time on this podcast and I want to educate and teach, is that there's some fundamentals that must occur for us to really champion and excel or scale along the evolution of this technology. And a big part of it is really understanding the people and the processes that exist and the processes that need to exist. And so at the core of it is data. So Shane, you just shared your experience. You were inside the operations. You kind of understand like the utilities perspective, and you had an amazing opportunity that, we want to kind of peel back the onion to really drive and prepare. And so I guess I know a lot more about what you're up to than our listeners. So, you created a data analytics team within the power delivery. Like, take us back to what was the original use case, or kind of what's the timeline that you started with this idea of like, we could utilize data differently to the advantage of how we operate the grid?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is quite the evolution. So I've been doing this for nearly 7 years now. About half my team is original members. So we've been here since the beginning. We were all in actually engineering standards, engineering services. So we were like part of the group that did process, procedures, material, even how we bill our customers, how we build our system. And one of the first ideas where we were going to modernize our billing mechanism, right? There's so much changing in the industry, labor rates going up, wildfires, vegetation management, and just new technology. So we were in the process of like thinking through kind of the core, how do we advance how we do what we do? How do we interact with our customers and our system? And our senior VP, Scott Moore, said, if we're going to do that, we should do it with data. So really give credit to him. He said, I want you to try and tackle this problem with data. And even 7 years ago, so this is 2018, it was hard. It's like I would brag on most utilities, especially Southern. We have all the data. We have all the systems. You probably have a good engineering process that captures all the jobs you build and what you build, your material, your standards, Maximo, AMI. We've got all the data. You don't have access to the data. And so when I started, it was like, I need access to the AMI data so we can see how our load works. And the answer was like, no, you can't have that. Like, who are you and why do you need it? And I understand now what that's about. We build a system of records, so AMI, and it is the billing for all of Southern. So you don't want me playing in that database, because if I mess something up, we lose too much valuable info. So it's really about copying the data to make it available. And so we started this, okay, well, let me have copies of all the data, which gets into another thing. It's like, where you're either going to double your infrastructure, your servers, or you're going cloud. And so we had to have that conversation, which is still a big issue. We're going to talk about the cloud. But so now I really can look back on it and go, it was about getting access to the data that we already have. Every utility probably has great data, get access to it, which means you got to duplicate it and then put it somewhere and then clean it and get it ready for analysis. So the journey was just migrating data, making it available, making it useful. And what I have seen is the first use case was hard. The second use case was easier. The third is infinitely easier. 4, 5, 6, the more data you have, the more understanding you build. And so our tools have rapidly gotten better over 7 years from the first thing.
I just have to share two things to our listeners. I had the same exact experience with AMI. I wanted the data and I was told no. And, being the leader of the planning organization where I need to understand what our customers are doing so I can have a better forecast, I didn't understand why I was being told no. And then that was like when my whole world opened up, where I had to understand, like, well, you had a highway that's built for 2 lanes, Elizabeth, and what you're asking for is 4 lanes. And that's a huge infrastructure that we're not even talking about, right? And so when you and I met, you shared a similar story. And I remember thinking, like, well, how did he go from right there to there? And what I heard you say is you became aware of the accessibility and you also became aware of the challenges, but you had the alignment and kind of the leadership and the foresight to like lean in and get the parties together, right? So it was, you kind of had to get outside of your comfort zone, being in the operations, field services part or services part, and engaging a whole other team within the utility. And so that's like a lot of, I think, grid modernization, operational excellence is understanding those processes. And another thing you said about your journey, which not a lot of utilities are sitting in, so for us to understand, is you have the systems in place. And so you are curating the data, maybe not all the data you want for the infinite nirvana, but enough to get started and building those, I guess the piping or the architecture to like unlock a lot of these use cases. So I love it.
I mean, it definitely came from executive support, and the other big piece was collaboration. So we started working with cybersecurity. We started working with the technology organization, the IT organization. How do you make this work? A lot of opinions, a lot of thought, a lot of conversation. So it wasn't quick. It probably took us 6 months to a year, but it was getting a lot of people together and explaining the need and the strategy and the vision, which kind of comes into that whole data strategy, data organization, data governance. It took a lot of groups coming to get that together. And it really all started with support from the top to say, we're going to lean into being a data-driven company, a data-driven organization. And to get there, we know we're going to have to evolve. So evolution is often slightly painful, but with collaboration, you can make that journey.
And the pain we're talking about is, it's requiring and asking others to change, right? And maybe asking them to change before they understand why they're being asked.
100%.
Almost like having faith or belief that like what you're being asked to do will ultimately pay off. So you have to trust that, what's being asked is important. So I'm going to just continue on this thread, even though we're talking about data, but like, I think from the outside folks, especially like our vendor community, those that are entrepreneurial, kind of developing, creating the best new device. If you don't understand the current space or the alignment of the utility or organization that you want to work with, you're starting at negative, right? -50. Yeah. Like you really have to understand that it's not just about having the idea, or even having the idea that'll unlock data that the utilities never had if they can't or do not have the vision to embed it into their operational rhythm, right? Like, say you bestow upon them this new set of information, like your reliability metrics are becoming more available to you on a continuous basis, more accurate, which I'm not foreshadowing any projects that you want to talk about. You then have to like create the teams or the understanding of the teams of what they're going to now do with that information, right? So how have you found, maybe you can use maybe one of the first tools you created or whatever to guide the team in understanding what's needed, right? How do you said you bring a lot of teams together. How is that actually happening? Like who needs to be at the table? You mentioned some of the groups, and then what does that guidance look like?
So I will tell you again, kind of 7 years, you learn a lot. I mean, you just do. So where we're at now is different than where we were when we started. Hopefully people listening can kind of use this as maybe a springboard to get further than we did. But I really believe now that fundamentally the idea, it depends on the size and the scale, but big ideas probably need immediate executive support. I'll give you a really good example. Team came up with an idea actually Monday of this week. The first thing we did was really reach out to the executive vice president of that organization and say, here's the sales pitch. It's an email. Like, here's the idea. Here's what we would do. Here's the timeline. Here's step by steps of how we would implement it. They jumped on it. So now it's step two is you reach out to the next level, business leaders. So executive management, directors, even supervisors, and say, hey, here's the idea. We have some executive buy-in already. Shoot holes in it. Would this work? What do you think of the idea? Let's collaborate. And I think working directly with the business up front, we will always be better together, right? So now I've got 100 people working on a project instead of 5. And yeah, they're going to point out some things that maybe we didn't think through. It's going to be a better dam at the end. And now we go build. So now my team's going to leave, build a product, and then bring it back to the key stakeholders and say, okay, we looked at your data. We took all your ideas. We built something. Tell me how it lands. Like, do you see any holes in it originally? Does the data make sense? Because I've seen us do great work and have data errors that unless you know subject matter expertise, you're not really going to know that it's there. So really making sure that it passes the gut that we all have in the utility business. And then now we're on version 2 or 3, right? We're improving visuals, we're improving interaction, the user experience. And so now we can quickly build a robust tool that actually has organizational impact.
So I
Again,
heard,
depends the scale, but that's kind of the scope.
yeah, you gain the alignment or an awareness of a need, or you don't go looking for the problems to solve. You actually you funnel your problems to be solved. You do a draft pitch. You build. You allow that business unit or entities that are involved to monitor it, understand it, tweak it, and then you go to scale.
Yeah.
And I think that's like.
Well, and to be fair,
That easy
like,
at the beginning?
was it that way in the beginning?
Yeah. Don't you have to learn that?
No, yeah, definitely we had to learn that. So my team was actually data analytics and innovation for a while. So we thought we had to innovate everything. So every idea had to originate with us. And that's fine. But if people aren't along on your journey and you come in at the 11th hour and say, hey, surprise, you're not running your business as efficiently as you could, make these changes. Turns out a lot of people don't like that. If you can say, and one, again, in fairness, I do have leaders now as we become more data driven that they're bringing ideas to us. So we were able to drop the innovation. So sometimes we have ideas, sometimes they get brought to us. And now it's the same process of I've already got an engaged leader, or I can go straight to your business leaders and start engaging with them to kind of like make the idea more robust and see if it's even practical. Because I've seen over time us build some really good things that couldn't get implemented, right? From either buy-in or change management, they just couldn't make the operational impact. And so one of the cultures that we have is if it's not going to drive impact, we're not doing it. I love doing data analytics, but I hate doing work that doesn't add value to the organization and goes unused. So if you can't really quantify how we're going to change the business, we're just not going to do it. And so we really have to have that executive or that really key stakeholder involved from the beginning, and then that ideation session. So,
just to talk about I remember there was like 3 or 4 use cases that was your original like seed, right? And was it around like you had access to the AMI data, your reliability data, and another data set? And wasn't the original ask? What was the original ask that kind of launched? Because when we think about what you're saying team, and you've definitely been at it for 7 years, but like what was the original squad, right? From like a head count and kind of like that beginning part.
The original squad was me and one other employee part-time. So it was, you're in engineering services, you're in charge of this. Can you do data analytics on this effort and see how does this process work? So I think we were one of the first analytics teams maybe across all of Southern, that's not true, but definitely in Alabama Power, we were one of the first, and probably one of the first few across all of Southern. And so it was me and another individual part time. And then it quickly went to there were three of us. And so that was after, okay, this will work. And then it became a full time gig. And then we started expanding. So there's close to 20 of us now, but you had to prove value. So it's been slow growth, one or two per year. The original ask was on customer billing and making sure that we were capturing what does it cost to run our business today and how does capital and O&M flow through the rates, and then how do you minimize O&M. And so we were specifically looking at vegetation management and undergrounding, right? So in undergrounding, it is obviously a huge benefit to the customer. It's a huge benefit to the company. It improves our reliability, but we're really making the customer have to pay for that. And so it was, is there a way to rethink of that issue so that you're incentivizing the customer to do what helps you and them rather than de-incentivizing them? So meaning, can we share in some of the billing? So we really went after understanding all the data between capital and O&M, our outages, so reliability, customer load, and then our financials for storm, routine maintenance, and vegetation management. And so the process was, it doesn't even seem simple when I'm saying out loud. It was super robust to build the mechanism that does your rates and then figure out how to tweak that.
That does not sound simple, and I know what you're even talking about. But I'm going to break it down I think it's helpful to hear. One thing I love about that original seed, and especially if you listen to the other episodes of the podcast, we as an industry, and especially external stakeholders, I actually just had a telecom expert in my prior recording. There's all these legacy systems and there's ways that we've always done things, but we pay attention to how do we enable virtual power plants, right? Or how, this is what, our regulators or customers want, integration of all this new technology. But what your original use case was to stand up that data analytics team was pulling your baseline fundamental utility performance duties, which is storm response and keeping the lights on and ensuring reliability. And so you took those very pragmatic, large sets of data, because that data has been present, and you took them in a disparate state and was the right word architect, or did you engineer? Because that's but you ultimately allowed them to talk to each other and started pulling information, which is the preparatory work that we all need to understand to be able to then run some of these advanced analytics and these tools that you've ultimately created. But all I have to say is those data sets were fundamental to the utility's performance, and that's where you started your journey.
It is. I've actually got a slide I still use to this day, and it is, here's the example. Tonight, you have a large transmission outage, and the next day, some executive wants to know what happened, what were the causes, what was the cost, what was the impact of the system, right? So let's just say we dropped 5 substations and 20,000 customers. Well, tell me about that. What happened? Well, so we have the outage data, we have vegetation management data, we have asset data, we have the financial data, we know how long the outage was, but it is not quick or easy to put that story together the next morning unless all your data is readily available and talking. And let's just say you do that and it's a one-off analysis, and then the next day you have a different outage and you get the same question on a different outage. It's a start over and start again. It's not a rinse and repeat.
Once. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so when we moved all the data to the cloud, now you do have access to all that data. And so we build the analysis for the machine. And now we have this infinite machine that's running that says, hey, the outage yesterday that happened, here's all the things that caused it. Here's how the age played into it and the vegetation management and your cost, and even possible solutions on capital investment to improve it. That is really where we're at 7 years later. And it started from this very fundamental, basic utility data landscape.
Which, has been always a question that has been asked of the individual contributors. That, so there is this expectation from the outside looking in that those answers are available, but no one really pencils out the amount of repeat work that you just spoke of for, a question that may happen on a Monday or a Friday, 2 different outages. It's you have to reinvent that whole process. And it's really not out of bad intent or, or even misalignment. It's just how the systems have been set up over the last 100 years. So what you guys figured out is defining, where to place all the data so it can talk to each other. So it's kind of continuously building and becoming more intelligent. Because another thing that's happening based on you all doing that is now you have a history of all of the questions that could have been asked and maybe that weren't asked at the time, but you can reflect and pull and build a whole other repository of information that has yet to be maybe asked specifically, but now you have this robust set of information that you didn't have before.
Well, I mean, you kind of beat me to it, but one of our big tools, RAMP, it stands for Reliability, Analytics, Metrics, and Performance.
You guys really good acronym. Say it again. RAMP.
Reliability, Analytics, Metrics, and Performance. We are good at acronyms. But it is next day intelligence on every outage that we have on our system. So it's all the things. It's reliability, SAIDI and safety, and SIMI, customers experiencing multiple interruptions, all the way from the top of the organization all the way to every meter in real time at next day. And then all the crew comments. And I mean, it's an amazing tool. That took us a long time to get built, but we just added AI to it. So what does that look like? Well, exactly what you said. We tried to anticipate what are all the questions that we're getting frequently, and let's train an AI agent to be able to answer those. So we tuned an AI agent specifically on the hundreds of repeat questions we got. And before long, I don't think I know we didn't intend to. We have a Southern Company reliability agent that knows Southern Company reliability better than anyone, and it knows all of our data. And so you interact with it in natural language, and it goes and writes its own query and gives you back a result of here's all the things that happened. And so I actually was talking to an executive the other day, and I said, what is the value of Southern Company producing a AI agent that will live forever and knows everything about reliability for us? It's like kind of infinite. If you think of how many times you're going to engage with it over however long that technology lives. I mean, it's pretty incredible.
And really, I think for those that have never been in the weeds and been asked to run the reliability metrics on a service territory or a grid, it was really cumbersome. And another thing, there was many who's that touched it. And then there was many like when's it appeared. Can you say when's? Time periods? So like the disparateness and maybe the inconsistency of it, right? And what you're saying, and just the amount of manpower. So the agent is like stamping it all. It's like one who. So like that, there's a trust being built there, I guess, which is something that we've never experienced. And is it taking away jobs per se? Not really. I think now it just provides insight to the doers to like execute whatever that answer is instead of like just reworking it.
It definitely provides insight to people who are going to get the job done, get the reliability improved. I don't think it augments anyone's job at this point in time. It makes us faster and quicker to be able to respond to customers and problems. So it's a speed to value kind of proposition. But to your point about the who, it's one person, and now we can track everything it ever answers and verify it. So you're building quite the repository. I mean, and like, I actually have a success story. We had a customer who was frustrated after a pretty big event and got on social media and said, hey, my power in this area is terrible. And he named a road. And so I was able to go into the tool, look at the road. It was a T intersection. I see what assets there are. I see what switch that is, pull up his account and say, okay, he's actually had this performance. That was less than 30 minutes. Sent back to social media. No, he's right. He's had some issues. Send it to the veg team, send it to the engineering team and said, can y'all go look at this? And we actually went out, scoped it from veg and engineering that day. So you had like next day customer service from a social media post. Would not have been remotely possible without modern technology and data.
The reason why is, to get to that answer in the before this tool was built would take more than a day. So when you say it wasn't like we wouldn't fix it or become aware of it, it just wouldn't be in that expedited fashion, which is what our customers' expectations are. I think that's not a disconnect, right? Like it's not like you wouldn't have known it, but it would have been a time period that may not have felt relative.
We would have definitely got it 100%. I tell people it's generally a 4-hour task. When I was in the field, it was a 4-hour task, like of labor. And if the day, if the customer calls at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, it could be an 8 or even a 12-hour, 24-hour, 36-hour turnaround. And what we've done is minimize that to, if they call, I can kind of answer that question on the fly. And so it's taken let's say a 4-hour task and turned it into a 2 or 3 minute task. That's like 99% effective, huge.
And there's an authority to it. So there's like a trust in the awareness of it too, which I guess gives you that esteem to be like, go, that's like a real, yeah.
Yeah.
Another, you can build the most elegant solution internally or external folk, but if no one uses it, right, that's kind of like a space. So how do you make sure the work isn't just about building tools? And I think you kind of alluded to that earlier conversation, kind of it's that partnership but reaching, I don't know, what is that evolution look like, right? That I guess we're going to go back to building that team and trust together. But how do you make sure the tools that you're building are operationally and customer useful?
Well, so now it is always a center task. How are we going to execute this? How are we going to implement it? So, but when we started, we didn't always understand that. And the change management process is huge in a utility. So I think when we started, it was a lot of times we would build something and then run and say, look what we built or look what we found and how are you going to use it? And it didn't always work. Now with the collaboration, we do a much different job. And I will really applaud Southern Company executives as data has become more and more important and more ideas are out there and we're engaging on a broader audience. I'm really getting challenged like often of what's the ROI of this? How do we prioritize it? And so it's made us really work with the business even more on the front end to say, okay, Liz, I'm about to build this tool. How are you going to do it? What efficiencies are you going to have? What does that ROI look like? And putting it on the pre-work. So originally, it wasn't even a thing we talked about. We did what we thought was right. Now it's come to the forefront of defining the implementation, the ROI, the action on the front end, and then using even that to say, hey, Liz, your thing is fourth on our list because the ROI is not as good as X, Y, and Z.
And I would have to say, I don't think, just from my experience and talking about it, like that's not a good space to start if you're at the beginnings. Like,
Agreed.
right? Because to challenge or ask your business operators, whatever space they're in, to do an exercise that you just stated without knowing that there's validity or true action taken once completed, will really cause kind of like a hamster wheel approach of like, are they really leaning into this solution? So it's important that you had those quick wins with that small agile team, showed value, and then build upon that.
I totally agree. And you just mentioned agile. So I would say we were a waterfall kind of organization. So everything had to be mapped out. We being Southern, and we have moved into more agile. Agile is critical for data analytics, especially when you're getting quick wins and you're trying to establish. So if you remember, I said we were actually a data analytics and innovation. My boss was in that kind of emerging technology, grid transformation space. And so his whole organization was built on quick wins, innovation, and it's okay to fail. And all of his organization succeeded in fiber, in analytics, in undergrounding, all these things. But it was because we had a mentality of, I'm going to give you some cover fire, do what you think you need to do in the right way, and it's okay if you fail, we'll learn and grow. As we've learned and grow and we've gotten bigger and bigger, now your footprint is bigger. And so we still have the cover fire to fail, which is great, but we also have a little more overall skin in the game. And so now it's also a little bit more important that what is the ROI of all this stuff? So I do agree, as you're small, innovate, agile, don't worry about understanding everything. As you grow with that responsibility.
Right. It's kind of that whole build, monitor, scale. So like to build, you had to start in this agile mentality, small and mighty. And then the reason why you're at a space of, okay, now we're going to scale. And as you say, the bigger the pie, you didn't have that many ideas to stack, right? So now you have, just like you said, you used to be innovation. Well, all the innovation's coming from the business because they've heard through the grapevine of all of these great tools that are being developed to help their job. And so now you're getting a large stack that you have to prioritize, and by nature, it's what is our ROI. So to all you listeners out there, remember, you don't start there, which I think there's a trend that I lived through, and I think others have, where to like drive out inefficiencies or identify your processes, like it just becomes this like exercise of additional instead of like this exercise is to allow me to do my job, right? Like there's like a different mindset of like, how do you corral the leaders to like become a part of the solution making instead of just like ancillary, like, which is a problem, right? There's sometimes they're involved too early or they're involved not at all, which then creates difficulties with change management.
Yeah.
So another thing I wanted to talk about, which, a space, and I think just in the world of data analytics and the language we use, there's buckets of data. You kind of described it to me when we were together in DC, but so I might not get the bucket names right, but tell me if I recall. You have your descriptive. So like the monitoring and reporting, like what is happening, which is a whole, to compartmentalize, right? There's a time stamp of when this data comes in and the historicalness to it. And that's the stuff that we have a lot of as a utility. It may be disparate and not talking to each other, but we do have a long history of records. And then the other is kind of that like forecasting insight, maybe like day ahead. So like you're able to pull your reliability metrics every 24 hours and, your storm data is kind of being reflected. And then the other is that predictive or prescriptive where you're almost near real time, which we can debate what near real time means based on which system you're working on. So to all of those, like, I feel like a lot of doers in the industry, if you don't decipher that those are three distinct roadmaps, and one, they all build off each other. So if you're going from nowhere to then trying to be prescriptive, right, you're going to have a hard time. So I guess, do you believe that's kind of the evolution that you walk through, is like knowing there's those build on each other? Like, so, and you've been really focused on which ones.
You nailed it, and you got the names right. I think
my recall is great.
I think of it as a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid is like these three buckets: predictive, kind of live, and then reporting, right? And so all three of those are top blocks. They're made up of hundreds of individual elements that are still in those three buckets, but like Spear is our weather predicting outage tool. So it is a model that looks at income and weather and says, I expect this much damage on your system. It's hundreds of use cases that just aggregate up to the pinnacle of, this is what I think is about to happen to your system. And then over there on the other end is the reliability. It's is what happened to your system and how you're going to fix it. It's hundreds of use cases. But I haven't found a way to go any further in aggregating them. Those three still stand out. But we were working on the live, again, what is real time? But we were working on the live one today. It's so much fun. It's so interesting to see. And literally today we were having this conversation of where's the line between predicting and live? Because if I'm showing you what's going to happen to your system today, for example, I expect 100 outages today. We're halfway through the day and you've had 61. So do I need to show you in the predictive model what's going on in your system, or do I move over to the live? So, you might talk to me in a year, and we might have two now, but it's still basically these buckets of where, and the it flows to your system differently. The reporting's easier, the live's harder, the predictive is easier too, because it's not the live data that's going on.
Right. So it's like another evolution to recall, right? Like you can't go straight to Nirvana near real time. Like there's a lot of work in between. But once you're at a 7-year journey, you can start tapping and knocking off that space.
Yeah.
So I could probably keep you on here much longer. And then you're probably quite busy. Just, closing the loop. You've been on quite a journey. I think your journey is really just starting, and I look forward to contributing and supporting however else as AEIC organization. But what's looking back, and maybe for some of those that are really starting at that let's go phase, like what's your words of wisdom that you would share?
Yeah, that's a great question. Start wherever you are and start now. right? You're never going to have 7 years ago stories if you don't start today. You'll have yesterday stories. And your data is never going to be perfect. Your analysis is never going to be perfect. You never have enough money. You'll never have enough people. So start with wherever you can with whatever you can. And I would strongly suggest collaborate quicker. I think it took us a little while to learn that, but we will always be better together. I think the utility industry is great. I actually love socializing with AEIC and EEI, IEEE, SE, all the utilities across the nation, because we're not competing, we're helping. And so I just wish I had have went to market sooner and said, help me. So thankfully, people did, despite my best efforts. And now I'm just hoping to help others, which I know is what you're passionate about too. When I think of the utility business in general, we are there for public good, right? We make people's lives better. They're used to electricity. We want to keep them on. We want to keep that rate low. So what we do in itself is like a service, and we're trying to do it for public good. So collaboration is at the key of that, and we can all be better together. So I just look forward to the journey of the entire, nation banding together with AEIC to make what we do better for our customers.
Love it. So I've heard is start now and collaborate and be a helper. And it's a journey. So, and leadership's like a big part of that. So thanks for being a leader in this space, Shane. And I look forward to continue the conversation in a couple of months and catch up on where you're at with us.
Yeah, we'll do episode 2 coming up.
Okay. So yeah.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the GridMod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.